So I've heard a lot of people talk about this Zohram Mamdani guy. He's recommended all over YouTube. He's supposed to be this like ultra left-wing super socialist. But when you really look into his statements, he's just a social democrat. He might be a little bit left of Bernie. And I've heard people who are supposedly Marxists, even Marxist-Leninists, apparently suggesting that we need to support this guy and that ultimately we need to support the sort of reforms that he's going for, right? But this is definitely a misunderstanding of Marxism-Leninism, right? And it makes me question whether these people are even Marxists at all. It definitely makes me question whether they've read any of the fundamental texts of Marxism. But the idea is that Marxist-Leninists, we don't reject reforms, but we don't shoot for them as a goal. We shoot for revolution. If we get reforms along the way, that's fine, but those are a compromise that we come to with the capitalists. Right? Because ultimately what's going on is that the capitalists want to keep their system. They want to keep the capitalist system. And by giving into reforms, right, if all we did was shoot for reforms, then what's going to happen? Then the capitalists are going to compromise somewhere between what we're asking for and what they're asking for. It's going to be somewhere in the middle, right? We're not taking over the state. We're not forcibly removing these people. We're having some kind of compromise with them. And so if we shoot for reforms, what we're shooting for is going to end up a little bit less. It's going to, you have to shoot high when you're going for negotiations, right? Because you're going to get a little bit lower than what you asked. Just generally as a general concept for almost all negotiations. And so what Marxists have to do, and what Marxists have always done historically, especially Marxist-Leninists, is shoot for actual revolution, full overturning of the bourgeois state. And if we get reforms along the way, that's great. But that's not what we're shooting for. And one of the key things to understand is that the bourgeois state and all states have a system of interaction with the individual where the individual is incentivized to do certain things because of the system. And so in this system, somebody running for electoral politics, they have to care about money, right? Because how does electoralism work? Well, especially now today with Citizens United and super PACs and all that stuff, electoralism is focused on money. If you don't have anybody donating to your campaign, you don't win. You just can't win, right? Because a lot of it's just getting your name out there, competing with other people who are constantly smack-talking you and talking shit about you, lying about you even, right? Distorting what you're saying, distorting your views, making you look as bad as possible. And it takes money to combat that, to actually get votes. It takes money to actually like show people that that's wrong, because you have to put advertisements out. You have to get people out there and talking to people, right? And if all you're shooting for is the electoral system and working within the electoral system, then this is never going to change. You're always going to have to get money. And what happens with that is that if you who has the money in society? Is it average people? Is it poor people? Is it working class people? No. These people do not generally have the money in society, right? The people who have the money are the people who own private property, the members of the bourgeois class, or really high-paid people, or landlords, etc. These people have the majority of funds in society, and so if it's a game about money versus money, those people are always going to win. They're always going to win, right? Which means that you have to get some of those people on your side. And what does that mean? It means you have to convince them that what you're saying is like palatable, right? It has to be palatable to them, has to be acceptable to them. And if it's not acceptable to at least some rich people, then you're just not going to win, right? Within the electoral system. And so you can't just focus on the electoral system without also focusing somewhat on the bourgeois class. And that's what Mamdani's doing. Like, he is forced, but it doesn't really matter what Mamdani thinks. He could be the most dedicated Marxist-Leninist on the planet. He's not. He actually denies being a communist.
How do you respond? Are you a communist?
No, I am not.
Even if he was, let's just imagine that Mamdani was somehow like basically just like Mao Zedong, or just like had like the exact same opinions as Mao, right? But then decided that he was going to do electoral politics, right? It doesn't really matter what he believes, because he has to go into that system, and unless he just wants to give up and throw the game and just not have any relevance at all, then he's going to have to follow the rules of the system. And the rules are, you have to get some rich people on your side or you lose. Those are the rules. And, guess what? Who set up those rules in the first place? Well, it's the people who had money, right? So by playing this game, it actually forces you to play by those rules. And by playing by those rules, you have to play by the rules of the bourgeoisie, which means you have to appeal to at least some members of the bourgeoisie. Now, Zohran works directly, as far as I know, he's just a member of the Democratic Party. He's not even working in a third-party setting. Like, he actually works within the Democratic Party like Bernie does. And we've seen what happens with Bernie and AOC, like what has happened to them in the past few decades, right? Bernie and AOC they weren't exactly socialists before, but they're definitely not. They seem to be even going further to the right. I mean, you'll hear AOC not condemning Israel on a lot of different things. You'll hear Bernie saying Israel has a right to defend itself and things like that. So if you're working within the Democratic Party, forget about just electoral system in general. The Democratic Party specifically, right? It's even more so, because the way the party apparatus works is you have to get nominated by the party, right? Well, how does that work? Basically, you have to appeal to people within the party. Well, who runs the Democratic Party, right? Is it poor people? Is it people who have no money? Is it homeless people? No, it's people who are rich, right? It's just one faction of the bourgeoisie in this country, which means if you're working with the Democratic Party, you have to get the approval of some of those people. And those people are not interested in throwing away their money. They're not interested in losing their positions of privilege. They're not interested in not being private business owners or not having stocks or not having housing property or whatever. They're not interested in throwing away all those privileges. They don't want to, because if any of those Democrats or any of those supposed left-leaning bourgeois elites were actually interested in throwing away their wealth, as some of them, like Bill Gates suggest, although he's not even going to throw away, he's still going to leave millions for his kids, so whatever. Even if they were interested in doing that, they would just cease to be members of the bourgeois class, right? If they were interested in throwing away their privileges, they just wouldn't be members of the privileged class. They would have already done it, because it's really easy to throw away your money, right? You could just donate it, you can give it away. You don't have to own your business. There's so many things you can do as an individual to not be a member of the bourgeois class. But the thing is, these people, they like the privileges that they have. They like being able to access things with money that other people can't access because they don't have money. And they're not interested in making their lives precarious or potentially making their children suffer or their family suffer, because they want to have an easier life, and they want their kids and their family and their friends to have an easier life too. And within this system, that's perfectly a rational thing. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing or a rational thing from a Marxist or a Marxist-Leninist point of view. I'm saying within the bourgeois system of capitalism, your incentives are to hold on to that wealth, because otherwise you're going to be in a bad spot, or your kids are going to be in a bad spot. It's idealism to suggest that, oh, I'm just going to do this for some greater good, or I'm going to do this because I'm a good person. Or there might be some people who might want to do that, but again, even if they did, they wouldn't be members of the bourgeois class anymore. And so they wouldn't have the ability to run politics. So the people that we're talking about, the people that we need to appeal to, necessary in electoralism, if we're going to play the game of electoralism, right? These people necessarily are going to be people who don't want to get rid of their privilege. They want to hold on to it. So by working with these people, we have to appeal to them. We have to get their votes. We have to get their money so we can run a campaign. And so what do you see from Zohran? You see a situation where it was oh, no, I'm not a communist. I'm a socialist. Well, what does that mean in the American context? It just means that if you're a quote-unquote democratic socialist, that just means you want to keep capitalism, but you just think capitalism kind of sucks. You don't like the way it's run now. You think people are greedy. You think too much wealth is going to the elites, but you don't fundamentally question whether capitalism should exist. You think capitalism should exist. Zohran never says that capitalism should never exist. He just doesn't really like how it's run right now. And if he did say things like, we have to totally dismantle capitalism, we can't have the system at all, right? Then it wouldn't appeal to the people he needs to appeal to. And, like I said, he doesn't need to appeal to really poor people. He needs to appeal to people who run the Democratic Party and who control the money in society so that he can actually run a campaign. Because if he doesn't, he's going to lose. And that's just how it is. That's how the system works. And it's not by accident, right? This isn't some coincidence that it's set up this way. It's set up this way on purpose by the people who have money so that they can hold on to their privilege. It's just that simple. I've heard a lot of people say that supporting Zohran, it's going to destigmatize socialism. It's going to move the Overton window. It's going to make socialism more easy to talk about and more acceptable among people. But that's not the problem. The thing is, all the poor people in the country can think that socialism is a good thing and that we ought to do these reforms, but it's not going to make a difference because the electoral system is not set up to appeal to people who don't have money, right? It's not set up to be run by people who don't have money. Like I said, you have to appeal to those people who do have money, and those people don't want to get rid of their privilege. So destigmatizing socialism you're never going to destigmatize socialism in the eyes of those people because they never want to get rid of their privilege. You can't convince them to get rid of their privileges. And if you did, they wouldn't exist and they wouldn't be able to influence politics anymore. And they would just be a different group of people who are influencing politics. See, if all the Democrats suddenly realized that socialism was some good thing, like actual socialism that wants to get rid of capitalism, that's some kind of good thing, then the system, the bourgeois capitalist system, would just be taken over by people who did believe that capitalism was a good thing because they would be the ones who had money. You have to have people who simultaneously believed that somehow capitalism needed to be destroyed, and also, at the same time, they don't want to get rid of their money, because if they did want to get rid of their money, they just get rid of their money. There's nothing stopping rich people from getting rid of their money today, other than they don't want to get rid of their money, because if they did, they would end up suffering, or their family would end up suffering, because they'd have to actually work a normal job and have precarious employment opportunities and things like that. So destigmatizing socialism, it doesn't really matter because the structure of the system is always going to be the same so long as that structure exists. You can't change the capitalist structure to not be capitalist. It has to be totally destroyed. It has to be replaced by something that is not capitalist in nature. It has to be, this electoral system of politics has to be completely dismantled. That's the only way to change the incentives of the system to make it so that people don't, so that the people who have money aren't the ones in power, or that money isn't powerful in itself. Another thing I've heard is that you just need to focus on immediate reforms and you need to help the working class as much as you can. And if someone comes up and says, well, I'm going to help the working class and here's how and here's my plan, and if it actually makes people's lives easier, then that's something you got to support as a Marxist-Leninist or just a Marxist. Now, I'm going to tell you why that's bullshit. Let's and in order to illustrate this point, let's look at what happened to the New Deal, right, in the 1930s. Number one, with the New Deal, it wouldn't have happened at all if it wasn't for socialists and communists, actual socialists and communists who wanted to destroy capitalism. It's a compromise that FDR made between the bourgeois class and the working class. And that's what we ended up with, was the New Deal. Now, that's fine, and the New Deal was good as far as helping people out. But as you can see today, with Social Security being dismantled and food stamps and things like that, these things can be taken away at a whim. They can be taken away at any point, and they are taken away. And they have been being taken away for the past few decades, ever since neoliberalism kicked in, which is just kind of like the capitalist counter-revolution. It was the elite pushback to Keynesianism that happened after World War II. Focusing only on reforms is not going to work because they can be taken away in a few years, they can be taken away in 30 years, they can be taken away in 100 years, right? As long as the system remains and as long as money remains to have the power that it has in society and the profit motive and wage labor and private property and all the fundamental elements of capitalism still exist, capitalists and the wealthy can use that system to take away any gains that anybody makes. So yeah, it might help people out in the short term, and I'm not against things like Social Security, but it's not something that we come to the table on and be like, this is what we're shooting for, this is what we want. That's bullshit, because we need to shoot high, we need to aim high, and we need to make them compromise, right? And that's how you get reforms, is by making them compromise, by coming to the table with a really powerful deal, with a really powerful demand that says, look, we're going to destroy the whole capitalist system unless you compromise with us. Now, even in that situation, I don't think we should be settling for reforms. We still need to push for complete dismantling because, again, just look at what happened to the New Deal. It's been gutted since the 1930s. It's nowhere near as powerful or as prominent as it was in the 30s. And this is exactly what's going to happen to anything that Zohran manages to push through. even if Zohran somehow did some miracle where he had some new deal for New York City where it just improved everything, he was able to get every homeless off the streets. I mean, how long is that going to last? How do we enshrine that into law? How do we make it so that can't happen again? It's just as soon as the next mayor comes in or the next person in power or the person above them comes in to step over them, that person is just going to roll back these changes. Now it's fine. It's like if you want to vote for this guy, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's not the thing that you have to keep in mind. It's like that's just the secondary thing that we do on the side, right? We might vote for people like Zohran, but we don't really care that much because it's not gonna ultimately change that much. It might change things for a few years, but it's not gonna be a long-term thing. It can be taken away anytime. And another point is that the more of these reforms are pushed through, the more we make capitalism an acceptable thing for working class people, the easier it is for capitalism to remain. The easier it is for billionaires and the bourgeoisie to continue doing what they're doing and to continue having the privileges that they're having. Because reforms actually pacify the working class. They make it so that the working class is like, oh, okay, my life's easier now, so I don't need to go out into the street and push for real changes because I'm doing good now. Right? Even though it might get taken away in like 10 years or something, I'm doing good now, and so I don't need to go out into the streets and push for real changes. That actually weakens our position because we have to push for a complete change of the system. Just going for concessions makes it so that the revolution is even harder to get to because that many more people are going to be just fine with the way things are. And they'll be like, well, I'm totally fine with this. And they're not going to push for anything better. But that's not good enough. Without getting rid of private property and wage labor, alienation, core elements of what Marx has always talked about, capitalism is always going to remain, and people are going to continue to be exploited, and they're going to continue to not get the full value of their labor. They're going to continue to be alienated from their work, and they're going to be in a precarious place to where their life that they supposedly are satisfied with is not going to be satisfying anymore. It's going to get to a point where it's not satisfying. You know, it might be their kids, it might be their grandkids, but that point is going to come back because the capitalists are still going to have their privilege and their power, and the system is still going to be there, forcing the material incentives on people within that system to act a certain way. By focusing on these reforms and by focusing on people like Zohran, we make it easier for the capitalists to actually win. Because that's what they want. They want to have, they don't want to get rid of the system. They want to have some shitty concession where they're still able to rule over us, but we just get a little bit more crumbs. That's exactly what the capitalists want. Whenever there's real strife and real disorder in society, they just want that disorder to go away. But they want it to go away in such a way that they still have their privilege. For anybody interested in the sort of text that would cover this, I'd recommend reading State and Revolution by Lenin. It's pretty easy to get through. So to sum up, reforms are good in the short term, but they're not going to stick around. But just systemically, it's impossible to make it stick around just because of the way this system works and the incentives that are in place in the system. Reforms weaken our position, right? They're not the things that we ought to shoot for. They're the things that we take along the way to make our lives better. But ultimately, the more reforms we have, the less people want to go out into the streets, the less chance that we're actually able to have a revolution. So, thanks for listening, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.